The lightning hit the same spot 3 nights in a row, and that was when Gareth Ironvale knew it wasn't weather. Natural storms moved. They rolled in from the coast, spent themselves against the Calder Ridge, and dragged their thunder east toward the plains. They did not return to the same patch of scorched hillside on the same hour of 3 consecutive nights with the precision of a craftsman marking measurements. Gareth had lived 41 years in the borderlands between Valdenmoor and the open ridge country, and he had seen enough storms, real ones, to recognize the difference between the sky doing what skies did and something using the sky as a tool. He was half-orc, which meant he had grown up learning to read situations quickly and accurately. In the towns, people looked at his gray-green complexion, his slightly prominent jaw, the tusks he kept filed to a modest length out of social practicality, and they decided, efficiently and with minimal evidence, what kind of person he was. Gareth had learned early that the best response to this was to simply be better at everything than their assumptions allowed for. He was a better tracker than any full human ranger in 3 counties. He was a better reader of terrain. He was, if it came to it, a considerably more dangerous fighter, not because of anything particular to his Orcish heritage, but because he had spent 30 years ensuring that he never needed to rely on size or strength alone when skill would serve better and attract less commentary afterward. He stood now on the ridge above the Calder Valley, the wind pulling at his traveling cloak, and looked at the hillside below. 3 blackened craters, each roughly circular, each exactly 40 feet from the others in a pattern that no random lightning strike ever produced. Between them, the grass was not merely scorched but fused, crystallized into something glass-like that caught the early morning light and scattered it in pale blue fragments. The smell of ozone hung over the entire valley like a presence, thick and sharp and fundamentally wrong for a morning that had dawned clear and calm. Behind him, 2 voices were having the argument they had been having, in various forms since the previous afternoon. "The pattern is a territory marker," said Dessa Wren, who was a gnome illusionist of considerable talent and equally considerable opinions, standing on a rock to better address the conversation at adult height. She had a book open in her hands, Field Taxonomy of Chromatic Dragons, 3rd edition, annotated, and was reading from it with the focused authority of someone who had spent significant time studying something and intended this to be known. Blue dragons mark feeding territories with lightning strikes in geometric patterns. It says so right here. 3 points, equidistant, triangulated toward a central lair entrance. "The pattern is a trap," said Moreau, who was a human ranger of approximately Gareth's age and considerably less patience, crouched near the nearest crater with his hand hovering over, but not touching the fused glass. "Something that big doesn't mark territory with lightning. It marks territory by being there and daring things to object. This is deliberate. It's laid a kill zone. Those are not mutually exclusive," Dessa said. Gareth walked down the ridge toward the craters without weighing in on the debate, which was his general approach to situations where 2 intelligent people were both partially right. His boots crunched on the crystallized grass. Up close, the fused ground was remarkable, not just burned but transformed. The soil beneath the grass vitrified into pale blue-tinged glass that rang faintly when he tapped it with his boot heel. This was not the incidental byproduct of a lightning strike. This was a sustained, controlled discharge at temperatures far above what any natural bolt achieved. He crouched and looked toward the valley floor. The land descended in a series of rocky shelves into a wide depression ringed by limestone outcrops, the kind of geography that collected water in spring and dried to cracked pale earth by midsummer. In the center of the depression, partly concealed by the largest limestone formation, was the entrance to something. Not a cave exactly. The opening was too regular, the edges too smooth. It had been shaped or widened or both. "How big?" he said, not turning around. Dessa consulted her book, Adult Blue Dragon. The patrol reports from Valdenmoor mentioned livestock disappearances starting 8 months ago, escalating 3 months ago. Based on feeding frequency and the scale of the territory markers. She paused. Large adult, possibly ancient. The book suggests at least 100 feet in length for territory patterns of this geometric precision. Moreau made a sound that was not quite a word. Gareth looked at the cave entrance, then at the 3 craters, then at the particular quality of the morning sky above the valley, which had the still, held-breath quality of air waiting for something to begin. 100 feet. He had faced difficult things before. Wyverns, A young adult red dragon once, at a distance, which had been survivable largely because it had been distracted by a burning barn and hadn't noticed 3 people, retreating at speed through a cornfield. This was categorically different. This was the kind of encounter that experienced adventurers wrote about in memoirs, when they survived, and that other experienced adventurers wrote about in obituaries, when they didn't. The village of Calder Crossing, he said. He kept his voice level, because level voices produced level decisions. 200 people, 4 farms, a mill, all inside the feeding territory. Neither Dessa nor Moro answered, because there was nothing to answer. They had taken the contract because Calder Crossing had nothing left to offer but the plea itself. The fee had been a promissory note on next year's harvest, theoretical. Money from a village that might not survive to harvest it. Gareth rose to his feet. The morning held its breath around him. "We need to know what we're going into," he said. "We scout the entrance. We do not engage. We assess and we plan." He looked at both of them in turn. Dessa, who nodded with the crisp acknowledgement of someone who respected a clear operational framework, and Moro, who had the expression of a man who had already begun composing the plan in his head and was now waiting for permission to share it. "Whatever you're thinking," Gareth told Moro. "We discuss it first." "It's a good plan," Moro said. "We discuss it first," Gareth repeated. They descended toward the valley. The cave entrance was not, as it turned out, a cave. It was a palace. That was Dessa's word for it, whispered with the particular reverence of a gnome who had spent her life studying things that were larger than her and had developed a complex relationship with awe. The interior of the limestone formation had been hollowed and shaped over what must have been decades, perhaps centuries, into a space of terrible, involuntary grandeur. The walls were smooth and regular, carved by something that did not use tools but simply applied heat and force with architectural patience. Blue-white mineral deposits streaked the stone in patterns that caught the light of Dessa's dancing lights cantrip and sent it, fracturing across every surface in cold, brilliant cascades. The floor was dry and clean. The scale of it, the ceiling lost in darkness 40 feet above, the passage wide enough to accommodate something of enormous wingspan, communicated, without any additional information, the nature of its inhabitant. Gareth moved along the left wall, one hand trailing lightly on the stone, reading the surface the way a tracker reads ground. The stone was not just carved. It was inscribed, faint geometric patterns etched at intervals, too precise to be decorative and too regular to be structural. He paused at one, bent close, and recognized it with a particular unease of confirmation, the same triangular marker geometry as the lightning craters above. Not a territorial warning for outside observers. A mapping system. The dragon knew exactly where everything in this space was, had catalogued it, had imposed its own order on the stone. Smart. Dessa breathed beside him. She had her book out again, moving her finger along a passage. Blues are the most intellectually oriented of the chromatic family. Territorial, yes, but also acquisitive. Not just of treasure, but of information. They study their domains. They remember everything, including intruders. Moro asked, from the right wall, where he had stopped near what appeared to be a large, very clean pile of something that Gareth identified as the organized remains of several years' worth of consumed livestock. Large bones sorted by type, stacked with a neatness that was somehow more unsettling than chaos would have been. Especially intruders, Dessa said. Gareth filed this and moved deeper. The passage opened, 40 yards into the main chamber, and there Gareth stopped completely, because there are moments in a person's life when the appropriate response to a stimulus is not tactical assessment, but simple, fundamental recognition of scale. The dragon was not sleeping. It was waiting. It lay along the far wall of the chamber in the loose, assembled coil of a creature that was entirely comfortable with its own mass, its head resting on the elevated shelf of rock that formed a natural dais at the chamber's end. Its scales were the deep, saturated blue of a sky an hour before a major storm, not bright, not metallic, but carrying within them the specific quality of light that precedes violence. Its wingspan, folded against its body, suggested a spread that would fill the chamber completely. Its eyes, open, oriented precisely toward the passage entrance. Toward them were the pale amber white of lightning at its source. It had known they were coming before they entered the passage. Gareth understood this with the cold clarity of a man reading a situation correctly and not liking the reading. The orderly bones, the inscribed walls, the territorial markers above, left not as warnings but as measurements, measuring how quickly something would approach, from which direction, at what pace. They had been expected. The dragon's head moved. Not quickly, with the unhurried deliberation of something that had decided the situation, did not require speed. It rose on its long neck until it was oriented fully toward them, and then it did something Gareth had not anticipated. It spoke. Not the roar of an animal. Words. Old Common, accented with the particular resonance of a creature that had learned language as a secondary system after something. Older and more fundamental, but clear and measured and unambiguous. 3, it said. Smaller than the last group. The last group brought 12. A pause, during which the pale eyes moved from Gareth to Dessa to Morrow and back with the unhurried attention of a taxonomist. The last group did not leave. Dessa had gone very still in the way of a gnome who is simultaneously terrified and professionally fascinated, which Gareth recognized as her most dangerous state because it made her unpredictable. Morrow had his hand on his bow without having consciously moved it there. Gareth stepped forward. One step deliberate and measured, not aggression. Declaration of presence, acknowledgement that he was the one speaking for this group. We know about the last group, he said. His voice held. He was proud of this. We're not them. The pale eyes settled on him with an attention that felt physical, like pressure. You are half-orc, it said. Not a question. Yes, the last group had a half-orc. He lasted longer than the others. Another pause. He was not as calm as you. I've had practice, Gareth said. Something shifted in the dragon's expression. Not warmth, not humor, but a quality of recalibration. As if a variable had been adjusted. Its tail moved, slowly, sweeping a long arc across the chamber floor. The sound of it was like distant, rolling thunder. You came to kill me, it said. We came to assess the situation, Gareth said, which was true. We came because the village of Calder Crossing has lost 17 head of livestock, 2 farm structures, and 3 people who didn't come home from the eastern fields. The dragon was quiet for a moment. The pale eyes did not move. 12, it said. Gareth went still. 12 people. The village told you 3. They did not tell you about the others because they were afraid you would not come. The great head tilted slightly, studying him. You did not know this. He hadn't. The weight of it settled on him, not just the number, but the shape of the deception, the village's desperation reframing it. 12 people. He breathed through it and kept his face level. That changes the conversation, he said carefully. Yes, the dragon agreed. It does. The dragon's name, as it permitted them to understand it, was Vaeltharix, a name it offered not as an intimacy but as a precision because it found imprecision irritating. It was, as Dessa's book had suggested, old. Not ancient by draconic reckoning, but old enough that its accounting of events in the valley predated the founding of Calder Crossing by 60 years. It spoke of the valley with the proprietary accuracy of a creature that had catalogued every geological shift, every population movement, every seasonal variation in the water table. And it was, Gareth realized with increasing and uncomfortable clarity, not entirely wrong about the humans. The first 12, Vaeltharix said, its voice carrying the measured cadence of something that had composed this accounting in advance, came armed. Into this chamber. They carried oil flasks and alchemical fire and a writ from the Valdenmoor Merchant Syndicate authorizing the extraction of draconic components. The pale eyes did not change expression. I defended myself, the livestock, Gareth said. Compensation, the dragon said, with the flat certainty of someone who considered the matter arithmetically settled. For the incursion. For the presumption. One does not send 12 people into a creature's home with alchemical fire and expect no response. Dessa had stopped trying to be invisible and was now writing rapidly in the margins of her book, which Gareth clocked as a sign that she was processing rather than panicking. Morrow had not relaxed his hand from his bow, but he had also not drawn, which meant he was thinking, which was the best Gareth could ask for under the circumstances. The 3 people who didn't come home from the eastern fields, Gareth said. He had to ask it. He needed the account complete before he could do anything useful with it. Vaeltharix was quiet for a moment that stretched uncomfortably. One was armed and approached the cave entrance, it said. The other two, another pause with a quality Gareth could not quite identify, were not. They were in the field. There was a miscalculation. Gareth held the word miscalculation in his mind and turned it over. From a creature that had catalogued every geometric angle of its territory markers, that had known the number of approaching intruders before they entered its lair, that had described 12 deaths with the precise detachment of an archivist. Miscalculation. The word sat wrong. It sat with the specific discomfort of a truth that was accurate in its facts and deeply inadequate in its accounting. Those two people had families, Gareth said. Yes, in the village. That is still inside your territory. Yes. Then we have a problem. Gareth said, that compensation in livestock does not solve. The chamber was very quiet. The distant sound of the valley's wind, filtered through 40 yards of stone passage, was the only movement in the air. Then Veiltharix moved, and everything happened very quickly. The lightning came without warning, or rather, with the only warning Gareth's body had time to register, which was a sudden pressure change in the air and the smell of ozone spiking to a level that felt like a physical blow. He threw himself left by pure reflex, hit the stone floor and rolled, and the bolt passed close enough that the heat of it washed over his back like an open furnace door. It struck the passage wall where he had been standing, and the stone exploded inward in a shower of crystallized fragments. He was on his feet before the sound finished echoing. Dessa had her blur spell up, her form shimmering and indistinct, harder to target, and was retreating toward the passage entrance while simultaneously casting something with her free hand. A web of crackling illusion energy designed to confuse a large creature's spatial targeting. Moro had his bow up and was moving in the opposite direction, splitting the dragon's attention. The first arrow already in the air, not to pierce scales that would deflect anything short of an enchanted weapon, but to make noise, movement, demand attention. Gareth had his sword out. It was a good sword, not legendary, not magically named, but well-made and better balanced than anything he'd been able to afford before the contract work had become consistent. He held it in a guard position and did what his training demanded in the first seconds of a combat with a creature in this category. He assessed. Veiltharix had not moved from its dais. The lightning had been a warning shot, aimed, he now understood, specifically to miss. The dragon's head was oriented toward him with that same pressing attention. You are not retreating, it said. No, the others are. They're creating distance and options, Gareth said, through the specific focus that combat produced in him, a narrowing of everything irrelevant, a crystalline attention to the variables that mattered. That's different from retreating. The pale eyes studied him. A second bolt gathered in the dragon's throat. He could see it, the faint blue-white luminescence building in the scales around its neck, the physiological preparation for another discharge. Enough voltage at this range to end the conversation permanently. You said we have a problem, Veiltharix said. The lightning in its throat held, built, did not release. You did not say you came to solve it. I came to assess it, Gareth said, keeping his voice level with effort. Now I've assessed it. The village doesn't know the full history. The merchant syndicate sent armed people into your home without telling them why 12 others didn't come back. You killed 2 people who had nothing to do with any of it. He kept his eyes on the pale amber gaze. Nobody in this situation is entirely clean. That doesn't mean nobody has to answer for it. The lightning in the dragon's throat flared and held. What answer do you propose? It said. This, Gareth realized, was the moment. Not the swords, not the magic, not the tactical positioning. This single question, with 100 feet of chromatic dragon behind it and enough stored electricity in that throat to vaporize everything in the chamber. He lowered his sword. Not dropped it, lowered it, point toward the floor in the specific gesture that meant present but not threatening. The most precise thing he knew how to say without words. One that both sides can survive, he said. If you're willing to hear it. The chamber held its breath. The lightning did not come. The negotiation took 4 hours. Gareth had never negotiated with a dragon before, but he had negotiated with hostile village councils, with mercenary captains who felt underpaid, with a particularly unreasonable river merchant once who had held a shipment of medical supplies hostage over a tariff dispute. And he had learned that the fundamental mechanics were the same regardless of the size of the other party. Find the thing they actually want, distinguish it from the thing they think they want, and build a path between the two that neither party has to be ashamed of afterward. What Veiltharix actually wanted was not what Gareth had expected. The Merchant Syndicate, the dragon said, when Gareth asked it directly. They sent 12 people with alchemical fire and a component extraction writ. They have sent 3 groups before this one, over 20 years, in escalating sizes. They will send another. The pale eyes had a quality that Gareth had initially read as cold, and now with 4 hours of context, revised to something more precise, focused. The way a wound focused everything around it. The valley was quiet for 60 years before the Syndicate's surveyors found the ore deposit in the eastern ridge. The village existed. I existed. There was no conflict. A pause. There is now. The ore deposit, Gareth said slowly. 3 years ago, the Syndicate surveyors entered the territory, I observed. They found what they were looking for and left. 8 months ago, the first armed group arrived, and the livestock compensation began. The great head moved, a slight adjustment that conveyed something Gareth could not quite name. The village is not my enemy, half-orc. The village is a casualty of someone else's calculation. Dessa had put her book down at some point in the second hour, which Gareth recognized as a sign that she had moved past cataloging into genuine engagement. She was sitting on the chamber floor across from the dragon's dais, an image that would have been surreal in any other context, with her hands open in her lap, the specific posture of a gnome who was thinking hard and wanted everyone to know she was not a threat. The Syndicate sent the first 12 without telling the village what they were doing, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd worked it out the same way Gareth had. The village was told they were surveyors, Veiltharix confirmed. And the village hired us, Morrow said, from the passage entrance where he had remained throughout the negotiation, close enough to hear but far enough to make clear he was not entirely committed to being in the same room. As the dragon, which Gareth considered a reasonable professional position, not knowing the full situation, you were hired to remove me, the dragon said. Which would have cleared the territory for the Syndicate's extraction operation without the Syndicate needing to send another armed group. They used the village, Gareth said. Yes. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. Not the taut silence of potential violence, but the heavy, settling silence of something being understood correctly for the first time. Gareth thought of the village elder, a gray-haired woman named Aldous, who had handed him the promissory note with hands that shook slightly and eyes that did not. He thought of the careful way she had said 3 people, not 12, and the shape of the fear underneath that careful phrasing. Not deception for its own sake. Desperation pruning the truth to the version most likely to produce help. The 2 people in the eastern field, he said. Their families, Veiltharix said, will have safe passage through any part of the territory, permanently. And I will not take from Calder Crossing's flocks again. Another pause. This I can offer. I cannot restore what was lost. No, Gareth agreed. But it's a beginning. What followed over the next 2 weeks was the most complicated series of conversations Gareth had conducted in his career, and he had once spent 3 days mediating between a thieves' guild and a city watch captain who had made a personal commitment to destroying each other and had been persuaded, with considerable effort, to redirect their mutual expertise toward a shared external problem instead. He told Elder Aldous the full account, all of it, including the 12, including the Syndicate surveyors, including the miscalculation in the eastern field. The conversation was long and it was hard, and Aldous sat through it in the manner of someone receiving information they had partly known and mostly refused to fully know. And when it was finished, she sat in silence for a while, and then she said very quietly that she would need to speak with the families. She did. Gareth was not present for those conversations. Some things were not his to witness. The Merchant Syndicate, when presented with a signed affidavit detailing their role in the deaths of 12 people, the deliberate misdirection of a contracted hunting party and the territory provocation that had led to the loss of village lives, an affidavit co-signed by a gnome illusionist with guild credentials, a registered ranger with Valdenmoor charter standing, and a half-orc whose name appeared on enough successful contracts to carry legal weight, chose to reassign their extraction interests to a less complicated ore deposit in the southern range. They did not admit wrongdoing. Gareth had not expected them to. He had expected the calculation they made, which was that the legal and reputational cost of the affidavit becoming public was higher than the value of the Eastern Ridge deposit, and they had made it correctly. On the last day, Gareth returned to the valley alone. Not to the cave entrance. He stopped at the top of the ridge, at the edge of the territory markers and stood in the early morning light. The crystallized glass in the craters caught the sunrise and scattered it in pale blue fragments across the hillside. After a while, the air changed, the specific pressure drop and ozone spike, that he now recognized the way a traveler recognizes the sound of hoofbeats. He did not turn around because turning around felt like the wrong gesture for what this was. "The village will keep the eastern boundary," he said. "They'll mark it. People will know." A long silence. Then, from somewhere that seemed both close and vast, "I know. The families," Gareth said. He had to say it. "It won't be enough, what you can offer. It won't be enough for a long time." "No," Baltharic said. "It will not," Gareth nodded. He looked at the mountains, the long clean line of the ridge against the early sky, the valley below still and pale, and for now, at this particular hour, entirely at peace. He had scars from the warning bolt. 2 across his left shoulder where the crystallized stone fragments had found him when the wall exploded. They ached in the cold, which was the sort of souvenir that 41 years of this work had taught him to accept as the price of doing things that needed doing and surviving them. He'd nearly not come back. He'd known it in the chamber, in the moment between the lowered sword and the question, one that both sides can survive, when the lightning held in the dragon's throat and the answer could have been no. And everything would have ended there in blue fire and thunder. It hadn't. He had come back with scars and a complicated truth and a promissory note he had told Aldous to keep, because Calder Crossing had paid enough already. He turned from the ridge and began the walk back. Behind him, the valley was quiet. The morning held no lightning. The sky was clear and ordinary and completely itself, which was, Gareth had learned, the best thing a sky could be. 6 months later, a rider arrived at Calder Crossing from Valdenmoor with a sealed document from the regional charter office. It was addressed to Gareth Ironvale, forwarded from 3 previous addresses before it finally reached him at the inn in Westmark, where he was working a considerably more straightforward contract involving a nest of oversized badgers and a very frustrated farmer. The document was a formal registration, chartered under the Valdenmoor Territorial Accord, establishing a protected zone across the Calder Valley and the Ironfoot Ridge country adjacent to it. Non-extraction, non-development, maintained boundary. Signed by Elder Aldous on behalf of Calder Crossing, countersigned by representatives of 2 neighboring villages who had watched the syndicate situation resolve and drawn their own conclusions about the value of formal protections. At the bottom, in a space that the charter form did not technically provide for, someone had added a line in ink that was slightly different from the rest, older, applied separately, with the particular deliberateness of something written by something that did not often write at all. The handwriting was precise and angular and not quite human in its proportions. It read, "The valley remembers who kept their word." Gareth folded the document carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his traveling jacket, beside the filed-down stub of his spare tusk file, and a small piece of pale blue glass he had picked up from the crater field on the morning he had descended into the valley. He had not planned to keep the glass. He had picked it up without thinking, the way you pick up something that has caught the light at exactly the right angle, and had found later that he hadn't put it down. He took it out now and held it in the morning light coming through the inn window. It caught the sun and scattered it in cold blue fragments across the ceiling and the walls, and his own gray-green hands, small and brief and brilliant, the way light always was when it found something worth passing through. The badger contract was not going to resolve itself. He put the glass back, settled his jacket, and went to find his horse. O destino desta historia, esta nas suas mas. Se voca acredita que o heroi não esta sozinho. Dix su like. Se voca vaio o que os outros não viram. Escreva sua teoria nas comentários. E se voca precisa saber o que acontece a seguir, inscreva-se. O próximo capítulo vai mudar tudo.